Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the Monmouth. Now that it's been reintroduced to the Armory for regular purchase, just straight up doubloons, I think it's about time I take a look at this one as well. Been going through a lot of these, very happy to see Wargaming introducing some of these event ships that I was not a fan of their monetization, let's just say, earlier this year. Happy to see them back for just a regular doubloon purchase. And in the Armory, you can obviously use your 25% off coupon to get these ships for a bit of a discount too. Now, should you with Monmouth? Well, it's a bit of a tricky ship to play thanks to its massive size, 30 millimeters of armor, upper belt and deck armor, alongside a gigantic citadel. Fortunately, the guns are very good here, especially in their range. We have nearly 20 kilometers of range, allowing it to play reasonably well into tier 10 meta. It's very different playstyle-wise than Gibraltar, even though they are almost identical ships. Gibraltar and Monmouth share the same hull. Gibraltar is in the Commonwealth side of things. Doesn't really change much outside of being able to use Cunningham on Monmouth since it is in the British tree, which will help us get an extra heal in our second game. This ship having super heals, but no smoke. That is the big change over Gibraltar as far as its playstyle. You got to play further back, you got to play a little more conservative because you don't have that ability to go dark and farm. But what we do get instead is way better shell velocity, allowing us to use this extra range we get over something like Gibraltar. And we also get a lot better pen. At 15 kilometers, for example, we get 308 millimeters of pen on these guns, which is pretty good. Not enough to get through battleships, of course, but if a cruiser goes broadside to at range, you will be able to citadel it even out to these longer ranges. Where with Gibraltar, you only get 209 millimeters of pen at that same 15 kilometers. So much better into heavier targets with Monmouth. However, you saw already a small preview of what happens with destroyers with these guns. We don't have any special fuse thresholds or fuse times on this armor piercing. Both these ships, by the way, limited to AP. So unlike some of the other ships that have these 234 millimeter guns, PVO, Goliath, they have the ability to swap to HE to do insane alpha damage into destroyers, as well as light fires. Not so here with Monmouth and not so with Gibraltar. But Gibraltar gets frankly ridiculous pen thresholds and fuse times, allowing it to almost guaranteed get full pens into any destroyer. You get 12 millimeters of fusing threshold. That means the AP shell only needs to go through 12 millimeters of armor and it's already armed. And then its fusing time, which is the time after that threshold it takes to detonate, is only 0.005 seconds. And that may not be sounding insane, but given some context of other ships with short fuses, like let's say Daring Destroyer AP, that's got 0.01 second fuse times, which is double the duration that it takes compared to Gibraltar. So that's why you're getting such consistent salvos out of something like a Gibraltar into lightly armored targets. And with Monmouth, we see a lot of overpens. Even battleship superstructures at 19 kilometers, still not enough for us to guarantee those full pens. And that's a big downside of Monmouth. You need to know that going in. It is not going to nuke destroyers like a Gibraltar does. This ship needs to be fighting against larger targets to actually guarantee good damage in. That doesn't mean you shouldn't shoot at destroyers. It just means you shouldn't be expecting some of these 10 to 15k salvos into DDs that Gibraltar is capable of. This ship, with its built-in acceleration, allowing us to dodge so much incoming fire, and you're going to need to be good on your dodging, because it is a massive target, but also our firing angles are pretty bad. If we're kiting, it's a 45-degree firing angle. I am not a fan of GK, as you know these days, and one of the main reasons is when pushing, GK has a similar firing angle with its rear gun. It's forced to give so much broadside. And so a cruiser with a gigantic citadel on top of that, that's a pretty big downside when we're kiting like this. It is risky for me to be using my front guns like this, so you got to keep your head on a swivel and constantly be playing with your rudder and your propulsion more specifically to dodge a lot of this incoming fire. When you're pushing though, at least with Monmouth, you get a 37-degree firing angle, so it's a little bit more comfortable. But pushing in, you're very committed with a ship like this one. You got to time it properly. Otherwise, there's no smoke to bail you out, And if you decide to go for your turn away, it's very predictable at that point, and this ship with its giant size and citadel will easily get dev-struck. It's only difficult to hit when you're changing speed quickly. It's not particularly fast on its own. And Gibraltar, by the way, has the exact same firing angles problem, but this is why they play so differently. It's the shell velocity combined with the change to your consumable layout. Here we're forced to open water, but we have the super healing to make up for it. With Gibraltar, you have a standard heal, but you have the smokes that allow you to play in positions where you don't have to open water because you can go dark with your smoke screen. And some of these salvos, now that we're getting a little closer, we can guarantee some damage into upper belts into some of these battleships. It is very good. You'll notice I'm also running outnumbered here, which massively buffs our dispersion. It is cruiser dispersion, which is very nice, but every once in a while it can troll you. So running something like outnumbered feels very good when we can activate it. A ship like this one, though, that wants to play on a flank, that wants to find those broadsides, I found I can reasonably consistently activate it. As long as I'm playing a flank, and we got a very good flank to play here, considering we didn't have to deal with overmatch, as well as we didn't have to deal with being outspotted and torped out by DDs. At least we have a Hydro, but still, it can be difficult when we're left alone on flanks like this. But just us against some of these battleships that don't overmatch us, it's pretty free to be able to farm them out. So I felt very, very confident. Let's get back to that armor piercing because it's very important we find those broadsides. Yes, it does have improved pen angles, but it's only Des Moines pen angles, which are very good. Okay, I'm a huge fan of Des Moines AP and Des Moines guns, but keep in mind Gibraltar gets Minotaur pen angles, which massively improve those final minimum ricochet thresholds, which are very good at getting you full pens even into perfectly angled ships at longer ranges, where this one will still start to bounce. Where in Des Moines, of course, you'll just swap to the high explosive, but here we can't. So you need to find broadsides, you need to find those flanks with something like a Monmouth. If you're going to be pushing this ship in the middle of the map, or you're going to try and find island cover where it's pretty well known that cruisers like to play, or you're just playing with the bulk of your team and the enemy team decides to angle to that, very understandably, you're not going to see these kind of salvos. This is an arms race game, of course, where we do have some pretty insane buffs to this ship, but don't worry, the next one, we still get amazing salvos out of this ship on broadsides, so it's not like it's only arms race that's giving us these incredible alpha damage salvos into this Montana, for example. But a really nice showcase of what Monmouth can do when it's left alone on a flank, where you don't get overmatched, of course. And fortunately, we didn't get focused by the carrier either. We have the ability to do a lot of dodging thanks to this propulsion, but we're going to have to against carriers because our AA is really not very good. We could swap Hydro out for defensive AA, but I don't think with this level of AA we'll even be able to do much to planes with our D-Fire up, so that's why we're going to want to run a Hydro. It's the same Hydros you get on Gibraltar here, very standard for tier 10, you get 5 kilometers of ship detection range. It's very useful. Now let's try to push in a little bit more. I played a little more passive that first one, just wanted to see what it was capable of at longer ranges, as that's typically where you're going to play it. Trying to push in is hard, of course, in World of Warships these days. And a ship like this one, caught in a crossfire, carrier sets one up on our other side, the Preußen overmatches us, and then Bourgogne from downtown is getting good damage into our flank as well. We're not slowing down and accelerating and juking very well here because my safety is the island, so I need to get there as quickly as possible. So we're going to take a lot of damage going in. We have decent amount of HP, of course, alongside the ability to repair 50% pen damage and 50% of Citadel pen damage, which is really good if we take Citadels like we're about to. But still, 50% pen damage and 3 super heals does not lend itself to getting max value out of these super heals very easily. So you're going to notice me use them maybe a little earlier than you would suspect, with potentially 30k of healing per heal. I want to get back to my next one because I know I'm going to be under a lot of pressure here. I don't think this is the best way to play Monmouth, by the way. It's something you can do if necessary, but this is a ship that wants to play a little further back, that wants to use its good shell velocity and AP to harass from range consistently. Where this close range stuff is really interesting, especially if you could find cruisers. But against a Trump, yeah, it's just overpens. Well, we got one full pen. I wonder if we managed to hit the water and then that armed the shell and then it managed to detonate inside his hull. I don't know. But typically it's going to be those overpens. We want to find cruisers like that Minotaur. And front guns only. Cruiser dispersion still is going to deliver for us even without running outnumbered, or at least getting the outnumbered proc here. So not necessarily how we want to play this one. Maybe this would be a more of a Gibraltar playstyle, but we can make it work with island cover, and certainly it's good to be able to do either one. That open water stuff is going to be a lot harder when there's overmatch, of course. So having the option to play islands, the shell velocity is good, but not so good that we can't shoot over some of these islands, crucially. So you can still play it like this. I just wouldn't go for it at the beginning of the battle like I did here, losing so much HP. It's a big target, and a lot of battleships know how gigantic the Citadel is on this one, so they're probably going to go after you as one of their primary targets, because they like those big juicy damage numbers. Although something you are vulnerable to when you do push up to islands like this, depending on the match, not in this one, they're playing pretty far back, but you can get rushed around islands, and a Gibraltar is going to struggle there because it does not have torpedoes. Here, at least, we get 4 torps per side. They are decent damage at 16.7k alpha, 10 kilometers of range, which is decent. But with our 11.5 kilometer detect and generally wanting to play at mid-range, it's a little hard to make use of them. I would use them in emergencies generally. I wouldn't want to be using that as my primary damage source. Acceleration kicking in there, keeping us barely alive. I was not paying enough attention to the Bourgogne having a shot on me there. But that acceleration is very nice, especially on a ship of this size. Although a bunch of torp protection hits on that Bourgogne. And this is kind of the downside of having AP only. You need to hit very specific parts of enemy ships, and if they're a maneuverable target or they angle to you, more importantly, you're not going to get that much damage. That was my main issue with this ship, was finding opportunities to let these guns shine. I know they are very, very strong guns, but they need to be put in the perfect situation to get any sort of consistency out of them. Otherwise, even on a Bourgogne like this, at 15 kilometers, we're getting a decent number of hits, but overpens, shatters, that kind of thing, it's not going to net us actually that much damage. Here I'm also concerned about getting shot in my side, so I'm only using front guns, and our damage drops off because of that as well. It can be tricky to make a ship like this one work. It is not going to be a very easy cruiser to play, given its size and Citadel. Yeah, the acceleration is nice, but you can still get clipped by a lot of ships that overmatch you. I got fortunate enough here to not run into too many of those 30mm overmatching battleships. That's the primary of battleships that we see at higher tier, so Monmouth will not be looking quite as tanky as I'm showing in these games. If you're good at dodging, it can do well, or if you pick the right moments to push in and find those flanks, it's going to do quite well. I got around 2 million potential damage in each one of these games, so it's by no means as fragile as something like a Minotaur, for example, but still, you're going to struggle with this one, I think, if you're finding yourself in those passive games and maybe you have to push up a little bit more, or you're trying to find those flanks and you get focused out on those flanks. I think it can be a difficult one to play, but tier 10 ship back for regular doubloon purchase. I had to cover it again. I do think these guns are very, very good when we're not getting shells go short when a ship is next to islands here. I like these guns quite a lot. I like AP, as you guys know. I like finding opportunities to consistently punish broadsides, and the ship is generally going to be very, very good at that, with its concealment especially allowing it to find soft spots in the enemy's defense. Here we're under a lot of pressure, and obviously we don't want to push spawns, but I went a little bit too far here. I should have gone back towards the middle of the map, maybe tried to catch these cruisers as they were pushing towards the B cap, instead of getting myself caught in such a massive crossfire. However, now the Des Moines overcommits, and he's going to show us our side. I did not want to continue firing, so I wanted to go dark, but if he shows us their side, then we're going to go after him yet again with these main guns. The shell velocity is very important to show here again, is so much easier to lead these guns than something like the Gibraltar. That one is such slow shell velocity, but it also doesn't have nearly the range that Monmouth has, and generally can play closer thanks to that smoke screen. So overall, I had a pretty decent time playing Monmouth again. The guns felt pretty solid, and I'm very glad I got to see this ship without any sort of crazy monetization attached to it. But still, 26,300 doubloons, that's the tier 10 ship price. That's a lot to spend on a ship like this one. So if you're looking for a ship of similar playstyle, but you can get for free just in the tech tree, for example, you could look for things like Henry or Castilla also having above 203s in caliber of gun with very solid armor piercing. Not with improved pen angles, but you have the ability to swap to HE when people are angled. Also ships with pretty large 30 millimeters of armor. Pretty massive weak points on all three of those ships, Henry, Castilla, and Monmouth like that. So it's going to be tricky, but similar playstyle on those, and that way you don't have to spend the lot of doubloons, admittedly, to get something like this one. And of course, Gibraltar is an option in the Research Bureau. If you got a lot of time to grind or re-grind out tech tree lines, you can get that one completely for free as well. Like I said, they do play differently still, thanks to that AP change and more importantly, shell velocity plus the smoke difference there. We also see Goliath with the same shell velocity as Gibraltar, so you're not getting the better AP pen at range, and you don't have any of those improved pen angles. But that ship, a lot more HE focused too. Here we have our commander, at least what I was running here. A bit surprising that I gave up survivability expert here, but given our super healing, I managed to make it work. I really wanted to run heavy AP, core superintendent, as well as adrenaline rush. I still wanted my concealment, especially in some of those open water situations, and outnumbered. So a little awkward to not take top grade gunner here, but myself, this is just kind of personal preference. I'm enjoying taking outnumbered over top grade. I like the extra dispersion that I can sometimes get rather than the extra reload that I can sometimes get. Personal preference there, totally up to you. Better turret traverse here, considering we are an open water ship. Sometimes we do have to swap our guns from side to side, especially given our poor firing angles. We don't want to greed too much if we're kiting for our main guns, if we have to give tons of broadside to maybe more of the enemy just to shoot at a singular target. So nice to be able to swap quickly across to the other side. Not the best speed, not the best turning circle radius, but the rudder is okay, and more importantly, our acceleration is absolutely incredible on this one, which is the main way that I was dodging a lot of that incoming fire. Running Cunningham also allows us to get that fourth heal sometimes if you get 2 kills. It's a little hard to do sometimes, given how it's not the highest DPM or reload rate, and with AP, sometimes you can just bounce on low health targets, or you leave someone on very low HP. You don't have fires that can tick out on someone, for example. But still, really nice to have the access to Cunningham instead of something like Gibraltar, which has no special commander on the Commonwealth side. Here's the build that I was running. Would not recommend you run even more range, by the way. While the shell velocity is decent out to 19 kilometers, any further than that, it starts to get very, very floaty. And I'd rather use that time spent on repositioning my ship instead of just kiting to 20 plus kilometers and trying to lead shots that way. I get much more value out of repositioning. At least that's what I've found. Here is the armor profile, 30 millimeters deck armor, 30 millimeters upper belt armor. Should be noted though that Gibraltar, I believe, gets 40 millimeters up here. So a little better armor on that one, but no super heal. So overall, caught open water, I think Monmouth is still going to do quite a bit better. But only 25 mil bow stern. And yes, that Citadel is absolutely gigantic. And you're not the fastest. So if you're caught in one of those turns and you're very predictable at that point, you're going to take huge damage. Easily able to get dev struck at higher tier. It's also a stepped Citadel here. So it's got this step up. And given that it's 30 millimeters of plating protecting that, anybody with that ability to overmatch 30, well, if you angle in, they can hit here, or sometimes they can overmatch through this section and go straight into this part of the Citadel. These step-up Citadels are really, really painful because of that. If it wasn't like that, there's a lot more ability to bounce or just eat full pens or over pens if they aim too high or miss this bow section, but not so with this this step-up on the Citadel here. So big weakness there. Gotta be very careful of those 30 mil overmatch battleships. They're very scary in a ship like this one. But at least you have the super heal and the guns to stay a little further back. And overall, seems like a pretty decent ship, although very expensive. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm just so glad that an event ship like this one came back for a regular straight up purchase. No extra added annoyances that they've been doing as of late, or at least they were doing in the beginning of 2025. Last few updates have been pretty amazing. Good job, Wargaming. Thank you very much for watching and have a great rest of your day.